Hi, this is Bethany with Shabby Fabrics, and today I'm so excited to introduce to you the Starlight Gatherings Quilt. This is made out of Starlight Gatherings Fabric Collection by Moda. We've kit this for you in limited quantities with a backing option available. Let's get right into that block. Okay, so we have made this today out of a layer cake, and this particular layer cake, if I kind of fold over the corner, you can see that I've got about 2/3 of this is dark fabrics and the rest are light. We have designed this quilt around this layer cake so that you're using most of this layer cake, almost all of it, in this for every component of the block. Okay? We would start with the first center here. You'd pick your dark fabric. You'd cut this into a 4 by 4 3/4 inch square, which I have here. Okay? And then we're going to build our block around this. One thing I love about this block is that square to square is such a classic block. It's actually one of my favorite quilt blocks, and it can be a little tricky because a lot of times a lot of the seams are on bias, but we have tried to take all of that fear and kind of yuckiness out of this to make it as easy as possible. Okay. For our next layer here, we've got a 6-inch square. We're going to cut this on the diagonal twice. That straight of grain is going to be the edge of your fabric, which will make the 4 corners here on bias, but our next seam, we're always going to match up a seam, like a bias fabric to a straight of grain fabric to keep this as secure as possible. I want to keep these together. And another thing we've done to kind of help you out, make this easy for you, is everything's a little oversized so that we can sew, flatten our block, press it, and then square that up to the right size. Especially when you're sewing with bias, things get really, really warped very easily. It's so hard to sew with that super accurate. So with our center square here, we're gonna start and take the long straight edge, and we're gonna center this on the block, and it's definitely gonna overlap quite a bit on the points here. I'm gonna try to get that as centered as possible. And then I'm going to pin that in place, and we'll sew that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And this first center of our square in a square block, we want that 1/4 inch seam to be really super accurate. So if you haven't picked up the guidelines, like 1/4 inch seam guides, that's a great kind of tool in your arsenal to have keep your seams super, super accurate. So I'll sew these two first, and then press them open, and I'll sew the other sides as well. All right, and if you are using those seam guides, because the edge of your fabric runs up against those, and there's kind of a little bit of a ledge to work against, when we press these open, we will want to go in and trim off the little dog ears that are hanging off. In this block, every seam we press, we're going to press to the outside. And that's okay because we have the sashing and the cornerstones in this, so there's no actual like points to match up. You're not going to have to worry about interlocking seams or anything like that. Okay. So I'll take this, and just using the edge of the block as a guide, I'm going to trim off these on both sides, and then we can add the other sides just like we did before, centering them as best as we can on this block. All right, so we've got our block, our first ring pressed out, and our next seam, we want it to be, sew right onto the point all the way around. So we need to have this trimmed to a 1/4 inch from these points. The easiest way I have found to do that is with our 6.5 by 12.5 ruler. It has the 45 or 90-degree angles running through this, and those crisscross right on a 1/4 inch seam guide. So I like to line those lines right up on the block, right at the point, and that'll give me my perfect 1/4 inch. So we'll do this for the entire block here, all sides. All right, so very similar to this, our next like ring around, or our next square in a square portion of this, we're gonna be, I believe, doing the exact same thing. Yep, cutting our next square, which will be a larger square here, cutting that on diagonal again, so we get 4 components. So to the edge, just like we did before, we're gonna repeat the exact same process. And again, we've made it so that that straight of grain edge will be on these bias edges here, so that we can secure those and make them a little more stable for you. Okay, and as I take this to my machine, the only little piece of advice I want to give on this is that I like to sew the seam with the straight of grain side, or the new fabric faced up, and the block on the top, so that when I'm sewing my 1/4 inch, I can make sure to hit right at that point and get that seam perfectly lined up. Okay, we've completed that second ring here. Again, just like we did before, I want to trim this up to a 1/4 inch from the points, using the ruler, exactly using the same method that we used for that first layer. All right, for our next component, very similar, but we're going to be working with strips now to get these strip pieces here. They are going to overlap a bit on each end, about a 1/2 inch on each end, to give us room to square this up. Exact same thing. We're going to work 2 sides and then the opposite sides next. And exact same thing. I'm going to pin these in place, and I'll be sewing from the back side, as I call it here, so I can make sure I get that perfect 1/4 inch seam. And again, we're always putting a straight of grain fabric here against a bias fabric to keep those really secure and help our block not warp as we piece it. All right, brought that back. That's getting a little short. Again, we'll trim this flush to our block to get these little overhangs off on both sides. And then when we go to trim this up, I'll show you what we do to get this kind of trapezoidal shape here. We have a really kind of neat trick to get that perfectly squared up. Okay, so for to trim these into our little trapezoid shape, what we're going to do is on our rotating cutting mat, we're going to turn our block on point so that these are on like the diagonal, and we're going to measure from this seam here, second ring seam, to about a 1/4 inch pass should be exactly 3 1/4 inches. So with that ruler again, you can see here, through here that 3 1/4 is the very middle of the ruler. It's got that white crosshair running through that. So I'm going to line that up right on the edge. And if we've done this right, the 90-degree running through the middle of our ruler should line up right on that point and give us a perfect 1/4 inch from the edge. And that'll be basically square or perpendicular to everything else in our block. So we'll do all 4 sides of this. I'm gonna set this aside and grab our fabric. Okay, and then our last bit, this is the corner triangles here like we've been doing. We'll be cutting these on the diagonal twice to get 4 pieces. And then this time when we bring them in, when I first made the block, I accidentally sewed them here and I was like, why aren't these matching up? They're supposed to go on the other side, not where the point is, but where our straight of grain is, okay? And one thing I like about this last seam here on this is because these are not overlapping, I don't have to do 2 and then 2. I can get them all pinned and sew all 4 at the same time. And then again, this last little bit here, like we've been doing, has been oversized so we can go in and square it up after to get that block super, super accurate. And then this time, this round that I'm sewing, when I sew these, I am not going to be running into any points when I sew, so I don't need to sew this from the reverse side like I've been doing for most of my seams. I'll sew this right from what I would call the front side of this. All right, pins out, over to the pressing mat. Again, always pressing away on these seams. All right, and for our last little bit, we're going to square this up and we're going to keep this flush to the lines that we have here made by our white fabric. And again, this spinning mat comes in really handy. And normally we have the, I think it's the 12-inch spinning mat. This block finish is a little bit bigger than 12, so I've got the 17-inch out today. So if you haven't picked up one of these, it is a really great investment to have in your sewing room, help you maintain that accuracy throughout all of your sewing of your blocks. All right, 2 more cuts and we're done with this block. Thanks for hanging out with me today on set. Well, I got to show you this beautiful block. If you haven't already, be sure to head over to our YouTube channel and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of these tutorials. Check out our Facebook and our Instagram for great new pictures and inspiration. All right, that's our block completed. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I'll see you on the next Shabby tutorial.